Welcome to Black Hat 2015. Thank you so much for being here. You are currently in Lagoon K with the session Data-Driven Threat Intelligence, Metrics on Indicator Dissemination and Sharing with Alex Pinto and Alexander Sierra. A couple quick announcements. There will be a reception tonight in the Business Hall at 5:30 p.m. The Business Hall is located in the Shoreline A room. The Pony Awards will take place tonight in Mandalay Bay BCD at 6 p.m. So that's Mandalay BCD. And that said, if you all please would ensure that your cell phones are on vibrate, we would appreciate it, and enjoy the talk.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you so much for being here. It's after lunch, so I'll try to keep you guys awake. I'm aware there are 8 other talks going on, so I'll just save you the trouble. The point of the other talks is don't put computers in stuff, because that's pretty much what's happening here all week long. So anyway, this is Data-Driven Threat Intelligence, and if you guys are on the Twitters, we have a hashtag for the talk. It's hashtag DDTI. We try to keep it very simple, very few keystrokes, so you guys are incentivized to use the hashtag. And of course, after the talk, I'll be following up and see all the terrible things you guys said about us and how this talk is terrible and all those different things. By the way, I looked it up on Urban Dictionary. DDTI doesn't mean anything, so it's completely safe for work for you guys to tweet hashtag DDTI. So without further ado, I'm Alex Pinto. I'm the Chief Data Scientist of Needle, right? And I've been doing a lot of research some of it is similar to this, some of it's a bit more machine learning-ish under the MLSec project. And this is my colleague, Alex Sierra.
Hello. So just a quick intro on what MLSec project and Needle are. So MLSec project is a group of like-minded individuals that are discussing how to properly apply machine learning to information security. We have a few open source projects, some of which have powered all the data analysis that we'll be showing today. So please make sure you check it out. And Needle is the commercial entity that was born out of our research on applying machine learning to threat intelligence data and information security logs. So if you are interested in that, feel free to look us up later and get in touch. The agenda, we'll start talking about a little bit, an introduction about what threat intel is and what is it good for, what can you do with it, why is it worth measuring at all. We'll talk about the open source projects, Combine and TIQ test that power the analysis we'll be doing today, measuring the indicators using TIQ test, and something that's new, this is in the presentation that has been evolving, we'll be talking about sharing communities and some measurements that we did on top of that, and then future research.
And because we're doing a presentation about metrics, I decided to do some presentation metrics to you guys. So we make sure you guys are keeping track and also keeping me honest, right? It's very important that you guys take something out of this. So we have 50-ish slides. Of course, I wasn't bothered to count them all. You know how these statistic people are. There's a margin of error there, right? But I can tell you there are 3 key takeaways in this presentation. I will specifically point them out to you throughout. Right? And these are really the things that I believe you should be getting out of what we're talking about. There will be 2 times where I will very uncharacteristically defend threat intelligence vendors. So I want to make sure you guys pay attention for that, but they really, in some cases, they need to be defended because it's really not their fault, right? And I'll also have one prediction on what the future of threat intelligence sharing really is, right? So then 6 months from now, when some new Flint startup does a PR on it, right, and they pay the ghostwriter for the CEO to put it there, you can just remember that you heard it here first. So anyway, moving along.
So what is threat intelligence good for? So if you're looking at the press and what people are talking about a lot is attribution. And attribution is awesome if you do get it right, which is the cautionary tale there. So if you are making a very structured, high-level decision-making on your information security programs, and you can take advantage of the fact that you know what the TTPs look like or who the threat actors are, then by all means do go after the higher-level threat intelligence data that will contain that information. Since attribution is so hard, It will be expensive, both the amount of effort of the very valuable people that do that work, and also for you to get either those people or to buy the service. So make sure you will actually use it. But for the rest of you that don't have the budget for it, and you don't want to feel left out, after the Sony debacle, a few of the people we know decided to help you out. So you're not left out of the conversation, because everyone had their pet theory about who did the Sony hack and how to attribute that. So there's this Sony attributed to website that will go into the Veris and the BIR database. We'll randomly pick on a statistical representative way threat actors, methods, indicators, and will generate a completely new, totally random, but representative report on how to attribute the Sony hack. So now, when you go to bars with information security people, you have something to talk about. You have your own version on how to attribute the Sony hack. And also, how will upper management know that you guys are really awesome and ready to handle all those pandas and bears if you don't have an attack map, right? So for the have-nots, for the people that still don't have those cool maps, there's also an open source project called Pew Pew that will allow you to, again, use random data. You don't even have to set up a low interaction honeypot or anything, right? It will just get random data from the VeriSign database and generate random attacks. And you can choose whatever you want for the attack names.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, most of you here in the room probably knows this map as the threat-bug map, right? But it was actually an open source project maybe 3 months before threat-bug came along. So, it's funny because even that they got right in their characterization. They stole an open source project, they thought it was theirs, right? They're a real threat intelligence vendor. It's amazing.
And the best part, it has audio. It will animate. So, you're going to blow off the C-suit with that, right? So there's more budget coming your way. But now, seriously, what about using threat intelligence data to actually defend your environments, right? That should be something at least somewhere on your list, right? So yeah, if you do have some strategical planning that you can use the higher level threat intelligence data for, go for it. But what can we do with the technical indicators? So supposedly we could use all those domain names, IP addresses, URLs, hashes, and whatnot to help us during the FIR and information security monitoring to detect incidents, right? How do we go about doing that? And there's a problem that people overlook. So we see a lot of talk about the base rate fallacy, but we don't see enough talk about the affirming the consequent fallacy. The problem is, when you look at an IOC, it's telling you how does the malware behave. It's not telling you that the malware is the only thing that behaves that way, right? So if you see a valid IOC saying this malware uses, the Google Docs or the Dropbox or whatever API, and you start alerting or blocking everything that talks to those APIs, you're going to be in a world of hurt, right? And so I don't know if you've ever seen 8888 end up on a feed somewhere, but it's rather common. So you're going to be flooded with false positives. I think that the important lesson here is there are interesting and smart ways to use the technical indicators, but they're not signatures, and they're not usable directly as blacklists. You have to know what you're doing. And this is actually some of the very interesting work we have been doing with the research. And but how can you know how good those indicators are? I think as we all know, garbage in, garbage out. So as a buyer, if you're going to buy a feed, you're going to buy indicators to try to use them in your very mature threat intelligence program, how can you tell which ones are good or not? How can you measure them? How can you compare them? There might be even value in using some of the public ones. And that's why we say this talk is data-driven. We're about to help you understand how can you measure those feeds and know which ones might bring more value to you.
So anyway, let's get some data going here, because I guess that's pretty much why you came here. That or the cat gifts, I'm never sure. So there are 2 open source projects that we have under the MLSec project, right? I will not go into a lot of detail on Combine, but pretty much Combine allows you to parse multiple sources of threat intelligence, open threat intelligence on the internet. It reads them all, it spits them out in a CSV or JSON format, something that's very easy to use, right? And you can manipulate in other different ways. Someday I'm gonna be able to finish my enterprise development course or something, and I'll be able to implement sticks and sidebox in it as well. And I don't know, maybe that's why I don't know, because I don't know Java or something.
If it uses XML, it's enterprise grade, right?
Yeah, it is, of course. And I just want to we're really going to be talking about TIQ tests. So TIQ tests will be taking this sparse data, right, that we gathered from multiple different open feeds, right, and using it to create statistical visualizations and some even more interesting statistical inferences tests that can give you a better sense on how you can compare a feed against another, right? So we have the code, right? So the code is there, up there on GitHub. So everything we're doing here, you guys can totally do at home with stuff you have in your kitchen. You know how this thing goes, right? And also, I mean, it's kind of pointless for us to be talking about a data-driven talk without actually giving you data. So we have a lot of data, right? So we actually published on this repository a year worth of threat intelligence data. So every single day since, what day is this? June 1st, 2014, we went to all these feeds, we gathered them, and we saved them in a way that TIQ test understands, and you get a snapshot for each day for each one of these things, right? I did some very back of the napkin calculations. We have like maybe 500K indicators per day. So that's roughly 165 million indicators that you guys have to play with. You guys can even open your own threat intelligence company with that, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, guys, everybody gets indicators. I think that's really all that you want, because we all know that the more indicators we have, we're probably going to be safer, right? So this is one of the things that we're going to try to figure out. So this is a sampling of the feeds, right? So as you can tell, I'm sneaking in code there, and there's actually an R notebook, an R markdown file, which is an equivalent to an IPython notebook, where I'm calling out, oh yeah, I actually glossed off that completely. TIQ test is built in R, right, which is a statistical language. So if you guys are actually working with threat intelligence with this volume of data, you guys are data scientists. Nobody has told you yet. So just call your bosses and get a raise right now. So I just want you guys to make sure, I mean, it's a great opportunity for you to get your feet wet with a statistical language as well, right? It makes a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here much easier. So you guys should probably take a look. You shouldn't have to bother too much with it if you just want to use the package. So these are the feeds, right? If you go to the open source file, there's a wiki there. It says which one of these downloads it were and things like that. So I'm actually using two feeds which are, they are open, but they are reserved, and in the sense that maybe not everyone has access to them. It's Caffeine's feed and John Brunenbach feed, but they're both in a way public, right? So we got all this data there. So before we get started on the actual tests, right? This is what the data look like. We have either an IP address or a domain name, and what's being tied to, what's the source of it, and which data it was collected, right? And so we're calling this our raw data set, which is we just got this from there, and it's as is, right? And we have what we're calling an enriched data set. We're doing some sort of tinkering with it because we wanted to normalize everything to IP addresses. So first of all, we are on that specific day that thing happened, we do a passive DNS query, and we gather what were the IP addresses that were resolving to that IP, right? We're using Farsight's data set for that, right? They are very kind to let us use this on our research. And we're also, I mean, just because, why not, right? We're adding stuff from MaxMind. We're adding the ASN, we're adding country, and remote host because, yeah, why not? But we're going to play with a few of these data points. And at the end, this is pretty much what it looks like, right? So you can see if that IP address, it came from a domain name, you'll see it on the host item there, right? So these are the raw data sets. This is how the data is presented there, right? And we're doing some experiments and tests with this. The first one is the novelty test, right? Which is something that everybody should be concerned with when they are ingesting some sort of intelligence feed. This pretty much means day by day, right? How many new indicators show up on the feed, right? And how many disappear? I mean, allegedly cleaned out. Hopefully it was not like a database crash or something, but they were actually looking at it, oh, maybe this is not malicious anymore. Maybe I should take it out my feed, right? And as you guys can see, it becomes very visual for you to understand what's the frequency and how those feeds are behaving. So when you look at this example here, right, we have on the upper left corner, we have the AlienVol data set, right? And you see it's a very healthy 5% each day that gets added or removed, right? There's a little bit of curation there, not a lot, right? I haven't really looked at the OTX stuff that they're doing, but I assume there's more, there's some interesting stuff there as well, right? And, but for instance, one thing that should be a very, very red flag for you guys is something like in the lower left, which is stuff is being added, right? And this is like 6 months that I plotted there. Every day you get a little bit more added, right? And according to my calculations here, by 2050, you probably blocked the whole IPv4 IP address space. So you might just well block them now because that's where that feed is going to get to if you really trust in it. But that's definitely a red flag, right? And if people are generating the feed for you, they're not giving you daytime information, as in, this is what these indications were first seen or last seen, and you cannot make a decision on that if you're going to age something or not. They're just giving you a dump of data, right? The fact that they're not doing the work for you is something that's very concerning. It's something that you should always be cognizant about when you are working. I don't think that's the case in any paid feed, but it's important for you to know the shape of the data, how it would potentially look like, right? And anyway, this is just an idea. You can see it varies differently from feed to feed, but a healthy feed will be able to change itself, renew itself from time to time, and to, of course, keep up with whatever changing attack landscape, or insert your buzzword here, right? The novelty test has a friend, which is the aging test, which is actually looking at this specific analysis on the flip side. So instead of trying to measure how many things get in and get out, so let's try to track the life of one indicator. So given an indicator there, how long does it usually live? How long does it stay on a feed? Do the indicators just sit there forever or something like that? So you get graphs like this. So this is all the outbound data that we had to play with. And this is pretty much things that are serving malware or CNC IP addresses, right? And you can see that some of these feeds, they don't go very far with that data. After 2 or 3 weeks, you almost recycle everything, right? That's usually when most of these IP addresses or most of these indicators, they disappear, right? And they get removed, right? You definitely want to be aware of how long is an indicator sitting on the feed, right, on the one you bought, the one you're ingesting, to try to make a decision if whatever aging work that they're doing is good for you and it's helping you out, right? So this gets really fun when you go to inbound data, because especially when I talk about inbound data, I'm talking about these guys who are, I don't know, brute forcing your SSH and trying admin and things like that, because these guys are just ubiquitous everywhere. And a lot of these feeds, they're actually just low interaction honeypots, right? They're just listening for this SSH port somewhere. So every time someone hits that port, that IP address, it will capture that IP and it will send that IP to a list. So you see that it just churns way too much. Every day you have a completely different list of IP addresses that are showing up to you. I mean, I really question the validity of this kind of feed, of this kind of information, right? There's a lot of people who based a lot of their threat intelligence in low interaction honeypots, and like, oh, these people they're shooting at you. And I mean, there are probably uses for it in a lot of different environments, especially if you're using that as a basis for a more complex calculation of a likelihood of an IP address, trying to defraud your site or something. But again, you gotta know what you're getting, right? You gotta, if you have access to the data and you need this kind of data for the kind of work that you're doing, now using tools like this, now you can actually check and see if the shape of the data that they're providing you is actually in accordance to whatever hypothesis you have on what you need the data to look like for your stuff to work, right? So again, there is no right or wrong answer here. I just think it's pointless, but doesn't mean that you have to agree with me. So this is an interesting one, and we have 5 tests, and this is the odd one out, which we call the population test, which is it's a funny play that we do to try to answer one of those. I mean, people are always asking the question of, oh, do these threat intelligence matter to me, right? To a specific measure of matter, right? And this, in a way, tries to play with that concept, as in trying to figure out if whatever data you're getting on your threat intelligence feed, how does it correlate, or how does it look similar to different groups of data that you have? So if you compare them, are all of these coming from the same ASN, right? Is everything bad coming from China or something like that? I mean, maybe you want to test this hypothesis out. Maybe you want to understand if you should push to your board that every single communication from China should be blocked, right? So you get some funny things like this. So when you look at and this is all, of course, this is all countries, but when you look at the bottom tier there, the lower graph, this is actually the real population of IP addresses. I mean, as real as you believe that Max-Mind's domain GeoIP thing is correct. Like, we're going to assume it's correct because we're doing all our calculations based on it, right? So we're talking about 44% of all the IP addresses being mapped to the US, and maybe 9% of this to China. It's funny because when you look at your the outbound data, right, more than 50% of the aggregated information from all the open threat intel feeds that we used, they actually point that 50% of these IP addresses are in the US, and only 6% are in China. What that means is, if you're connecting to an IP address in the US, it's actually more likely for that IP address to be infected than if you were connecting to an IP address in China, because the distribution of all the IP addresses in the world, right, if you're just connecting randomly to them, you would be pinging the chance you'd be pinging an IP address in the US or China, and then if it's malicious or not. So it lets you play some interesting games to try to see if really your concerns about, especially when you're talking about these low-level indicators like IP address. Of course, we do not condone any sort of GeoIP-based attribution. It starts to get interesting to see and to compare different data sets and see if you're getting like for like, and if the data sets are different from each other, right? And it's really about sampling, right? It's really about different threat intel feeds, different providers. They will have different techniques. They will have different ways to gather this data. So they will be sampling badness from different places, right? And so you can definitely look at those different feeds and try to figure out if there's a skew on their method. Oh, this guy is much more likely to give me information about cybercrime. This guy is much more likely to give me information about general espionage, right? And sometimes they'll tell you one thing, and they could not be doing that with the data, right? And this is an interesting way for you to aggregate the data and to look at it and to try to make these decisions yourself, right? So we actually have a statistical inference implementation of that you can actually do, right? I'm not going to get into this. I'm not going to go into any detail, but you can pretty much see if things are more likely to be malicious on a specific country or an ASN or something like that, less likely, or you just don't care. It's just like the same. It's always Germany. I don't know. They're doing their work very well, whatever they're doing. So anyway, this is just the an interesting tool to play with. So the overlap test is one of the most interesting we got because we can actually tell if those feeds they have the same data or not, right? So if you look at the inbound data, it seems every single person, I mean, a lot of these people are using the same honeypots to gather this data and do all those different things. Like you see, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of different things going on there, right? And I mean, it just really tells that some people have turned on their machine to scan the whole internet, so they will hit everyone's honeypots, or people are sharing honeypots. So again, I don't really think there's a lot of insight we can grasp from this, right? But the one that really got me, the one that makes me really interested in, is really the outbound data. Because when you look at all those different feeds, right? And if I were to add some private feeds there, feeds that you actually pay for, you would see that they don't seem to overlap that much, right? It seems like everyone is identifying different pieces of malware, or even if they're tracking the same actors, they're all pointing at different IP addresses, different domains, different sources, right? And that really got me thinking. I mean, is this really so diverse? Is this really so distributed? Are people just making IP addresses up? I mean, are we researching the same things, right? And I decided to look at the idea of a uniqueness test, right? Which is, I mean, how unique is a piece of data? I mean, in what percentage so let's say I have 10 feeds, how much of my data only show up on one feed? How much of my data only show in two feeds? And the motivation behind this is pretty much how do you measure how many fish there are in a lake, right? So if you have, one of the easiest ways to do that, you just get a net and you get like 100 fishes out of the lake. And you tag all these 100 fishes, and then you just throw them back and give them some time to recuperate from the trauma or anything like that. They'll swim around the lake, they'll be merry, you know, they'll do their fishy things. And then you go back there and you just do it again. You get 100 fish out of the lake, right? And assuming you did it randomly, right? Especially if you go to different parts of the lake and don't get the 100 fish from the same place. The amount of fish that you actually get from both of these draws, right, the ones that were actually tagged, will give you a general idea of how many people you actually have covered. So if you only got 5% of the fish, so we're talking about 100 fish, if you only got 5 fish that were tagged, your population is probably on the vicinity of 20 times 100 fish, right? So kind of the amount of draw that we have. Of course, you do this 100,000 times. I don't know how many of you guys studied statistics, and you find what the standard deviation is and what's the confidence level, blah blah blah. But you catch my drift, right? And there's actually studies about this, and the CertCC did a study late last year about how much uniqueness this was, and I thought it was. When I looked at those numbers, I thought, these guys are crazy. They clearly did something wrong. It's impossible that and they claim to have been looking at, I don't know, 75 different feeds or something like that. And they had this amazing uniqueness. People are not reporting on the same things. Maybe they're even finding the same things. They're just reporting part of it. Nobody knows, right? It's all very opaque. And I was like, no, this is wrong. I'm going to write a uniqueness test, and I'm going to prove that these guys are wrong. I'm going to come here on Black Hat, and I'm going to tell everyone how I disproved CertCC. No, they were absolutely right. So when I used my data, right, and again, and this is 6 months worth of data, it's staggering the amount of uniqueness, right? And it doesn't look good, right? If you think about the fish analogy, it means that if we're all drawing from the same pond of evil cyber fish, right? We're not catching enough fish, right? So what chance do we have at all of trying to map, in a way, what is good or what is bad in mere indicators, right? In things that you would be able to represent very discreetly like that. So, and this was actually the point that we did on the DBIR earlier this year in April, right? So we were invited by Verizon to actually write part of the threat intelligence blurb, because we had been they were aware we had been doing this research for almost 9 months at the time, right? And pretty much the conclusion here was that given this situation, The idea that you would be secure just hoarding all the indicators, right? It's a lie. It's never going to work. That's not a winning strategy, right? You're not going to be winning. You're not going to be able to create any semblance of reasonable threat intelligence program just by thinking about, oh, I'll get all the indicators here. I'll buy 1 feed, 2 feeds, 3 feeds, 200,000 feeds. And somehow I'll make them run on my SIM or my firewall. I have no idea it's a big data firewall, by the way, and how this would run. And it's an unwinnable, right? And here's our key takeaway number one, right? The more threat intelligence feeds you have does not mean that you have a better program, right? The point of the program, right, when people say a threat intelligence program, the point here is that you're trying to learn from whatever information, and then you just don't have the feed, you just don't have the indicators, you have the contextual information about, oh, this was this guy, this was that guy, right? And this is how they behave, right? This is the kind of tools that they use. This is, anyway, this is more or less the way that they register who is, or have been doing that in the past. And then you learn from these examples. Your analysts learn from these examples, right? And now, if they're faced with an incident or an event inside your network, they can make an informed decision that, oh, you know what? I have actually seen this before. This looks a lot like whatever noun animal, right? And I know how to handle these guys. I know how to figure how to maybe best defend against this. So, I mean, it's really important we take a break here, right? And what I'm saying here is not that you shouldn't get threat intelligence feeds, right? What I'm saying that is it's not, the winning move is to learn from them. It's not from blindly using them. The work that these people that do the research, commonly told about the threat intelligence providers, the guys who are actually there on the trenches, they're crawling through air ducts to get the intel for you, whatever they do, right? These guys, they're usually providing a very good service, right? And it's just largely unused by the population, right? And I'll get back to that point again. I mean, if we weren't doing this, if they weren't doing this, I mean, how would we know about sliding panda, right? Which is the new, our new threat actor. I love sliding panda. So the second key takeaway from this talk, right, is that you guys should all love DJ Kitty. So DJ Kitty is not a threat actor as far as I know, but he drops some amazing beats, right? So I think this is an important takeaway. It's probably the one that people remember the most from this talk.
If you remember one thing, remember DJ Kitty. I think another, just quickly talking about the uniqueness test, if you see all of those very competent, salt-of-the-earth people that are doing the threat, the basic research and finding and reversing the malware, fighting threat actors, and if you see that even with all those companies doing all that work, we're still finding very few indicators in common, that would also give us some indication of the size of the total universe of findable things, which seems is pretty huge. So, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But wait, all those problems are solved, right? Now there's threat intelligence sharing. So shouldn't threat intelligence sharing help us solve those problems? So threat intelligence sharing is a good thing. You know, my mom always taught me to share, to be a nice kid. And so it's only polite that you share if you have good data. But can we measure that? Can we find out how good it is? But first, some people have been talking about this term, herd immunity. And I'm not an epidemiologist, but I play one on Black Hat. And so I would like to talk a little bit about herd immunity. Herd immunity, the epidemiology concept is, since diseases have to spread between people that are physically close to each other, if you have a large population, of course, you only meet, if you're in a large city, you're only going to get into physical contact with a very small subset of the entire population. So there's a point where even if you are not vaccinated yourself, but if most people in the population are vaccinated or are immunized somehow against some sort of disease, the odds that you will bump into someone that is infected lowers dramatically. So even though you're not immunized yourself, you are still benefiting from the fact that a lot of people are, right? And that translates beautifully to threat intelligence, right? Because no one has port 25 TCP listening to emails from everywhere in the world. You don't have any services at all. It's very restricted. It makes no sense to think that because you are on a vertical and you're bank A, and now because you shared an indicator with banks B, C, D, and E, that bank F, even though he does not have any signatures or any protective controls for this malware, he will be magically protected from that. Because if you believe the threat intelligence sharing brings herd immunity, is what you're thinking, is what you're implying. And I think that's just ludicrous, right? Everyone is connected to everyone on the internet. The basic premise that you have to be physically close to someone just does not apply. Anyway, sorry for the rant. I get really angry at screaming at my computer when I see some marketing materials. That's just me. So let's talk about sharing. How much sharing is going on? Is everyone sharing, or are people just leeching? So what can we learn from actual data that tells us how sharing is being done? Because, yeah, there is some value. The same way that there is value on any threat intelligence feed, there is value in getting new indicators that might not be on anyone's feeds because you have a trusted company that did the research themselves and someone that was attacking them and shared it with you. But how good is that? And so in order to do that, again, we're a data-driven presentation here, we reached out to a few sharing communities, and a lot of them responded and gave us anonymized data that allows us to do the research without letting us know anything about the actual content or who was involved in the sharing, to protect both the innocent and the guilty alike. And so we would particularly like to thank the people, nice people at Facebook Threat Exchange and Threat Connect for sharing the data with us and allowing us to name them, and all the other people that shared the data but asked to remain anonymous. We love you too. We just, the love that they're
Less
not
publicly. We love you less publicly.
Yeah, platonically perhaps.
So anyway, this is very much a work in progress, right? I do not have structured tests as I have for the threat intelligence indicator yet. I'm honestly just getting my feet wet with this data, and I'm looking forward to continuing these kinds of analysis with more and more people, right? So one of the things that I'm not doing, which bothered me a lot, is that I don't think I'm able to share these numbers with you, the actual numbers that I'm using behind this presentation, because although there were a few sharing communities, there are definitely not enough of them in the sense that if I publish this data, the smartest amongst you would be able to tell them apart, would know who I'm talking about when I say it's sharing community A or sharing community B, right? So there's probably, as we grow this data set and we get more people to participate, right, we're probably going to be able to share some sort of anonymized cold hard data into these things, right? So basically we're looking about 3 months of data, right? We're trying to figure out what are the number of indicators that are shared by day and the number of indicators that are shared by member. And one of the things I was very keen of getting, and it's something that one of the ways I will expand this research is how many, not so much how many of them were added, but how many of them were deleted or how many of them were edited later, right? Because these are indirect signs of some sort of quality problem there. If you had put an indicator in and then you had to change it somehow, maybe you weren't so sure the first time, right? So this is one of the things that not a lot of people think about when they're doing sharing communities. In fact, almost all of them were unable to provide this data for me from their
platforms.
From their systems. The ones that could, again, they were way too little, and I can't really present this data in any meaningful way without giving them away. So stay tuned. So some interesting things happen when you look at that. So this is thinking about sharing by day, right? And it's funny as hell because the largest community, this is the largest community I had, right? And you look at that day by day, maybe the largest, something bad happened on that spike there, but the largest amount of sharing that had in a specific day were 200 indicators, right? From IP addresses to domain names or things like that, right? When you look at the smaller communities, there's a lot more going on. Now you get to the 1500s, right? And again, this ties into our intuition that, well, if there's like a lot of people in this community, right, and I don't know them all, right, maybe I don't want to tell everything that I know, right? And a lot of the intelligence community has been doing sharing in some way or another in very close circles, in very close trust groups, right? And we're seeing that even with all the technology and all the way that we're making this popular, we're trying to make this popular and easier for people to do that, that mentality is not changing, right? And I honestly don't think it will change a lot, right? Which is very conflicting with the idea that people are being pushed to share more. So I can't really work that out in my head right now. Maybe you guys can. How do you get this conflicting thing?
It's the high school cafeteria all over again.
Yeah.
Basically.
So, but even when you look at the volume, right? And it's not across the board. It's not like everyone is sharing. So I have, this is again another example, right? This is a smallish community. They are in the high tens, right? There's like 8 people during that period, actually 10% of them actually shared something. And this is a log axis. So the first guy had like 1,700,000 indicators that they shared, right? The second one was more on the 20,000 or something like that. That's a log graph. It's really disproportional, right? And you see these kind of things, even in environments where you don't have what we call a catalyst, or, oh, this is the guy who owns the threat intelligence sharing community, so he feels kind of responsible to add stuff there from time to time and to try to curate those things. Even in situations where you have like equal peers, so to speak, right? You see things like this. You see there's maybe a 10%, a 15% of people that are actively sharing and contributing back to the pot. That does not surprise me and shouldn't surprise you either, because that's just the way that social networks organize themselves, right? So this is not a like for like, this is Twitter followers, not how many times people have tweeted, but you clearly see that you have something that looks power law-ish. So if Reutemann is here from Canon Security, no, I did not check if it's a power law, leave me alone, right? But it's power law-ish, it's good enough, right? And another thing I wanted to discuss, which I think is relevant, is also something that you guys are curious about, is does it make a difference? And this is really the overlap thing again, but I'm adding 2 private feeds to it, right? And I'm also adding a sharing community. So I'm treating the sharing community as a threat intelligence feed, right? And you see that the overlap properties, they maintain themselves, right? In fact, I could even think of the sharing community as a kind of a threat intelligence feed. I don't know, the cafeteria-like threat intelligence feed we were talking about, right? And you see the same thing in the uniqueness. So the point that gets me, right, would it be the same? Would they be equivalents in this new world, right? You can get a feed from someone, or you can be part of a threat intelligence community, right? It's kind of the same, but it's a little bit different, right? Like everything in life. And the biggest question, I think, that people ask themselves, right, and they should be asking themselves, is maturity, right? Are you just pretending to be an adult? Are you there like, oh, I'm gonna do some sharing and I know what I'm doing, and look, I got 8.8.8. This guy's clearly very evil. Let me contribute back to my community so that they can all be safe from this evildoer, right? And this becomes a very, very large concern on these communities. And anecdotally, again, right, people that actually depend on these sharing communities, they have a huge concern as more and more people come in to see if they have a mature-ish enough threat intelligence program that they can meaningfully contribute back. So the question becomes, when you enter into a sharing community like that, are you like getting the best news, you're like having a curated feed, you're knowing everything what's doing, or did you just sign up to the Reddit of threat intelligence? You don't want to go to the Reddit for threat intelligence. Reddit of threat intelligence is just endless repos of the 4chan of threat intelligence, right? And that's on the dark web, by the way. So so just a quick note, I was looking for something that would represent how awful Reddit was, but I couldn't find any comment that just didn't make me feel sick. So I'm just publicizing Sarah Jong's book, which talks about how Reddit and other internet communities they tend to be very awful. But I'm not preaching here about elitism, right? And this was something that 451 published recently about, was threat intelligence just for the 1%, right? Was this something that only the highest tier people would be able to meaningfully use and meaningfully work? And I don't think we should try to take these people away, right? And we should be able to provide them some help with questions like this, right? As in, how can sharing and how can these things help me understand what maybe it's something that's happening only to me, or it's something that could be understood as a commodity? So the next takeaway that I want to do, the thing that I want to close this presentation with, is that actually these people should all be working together, right? But maybe not publishing content. Maybe not everyone is mature enough to publish content back to a threat intelligence community, but everyone has telemetry. Everyone knows who they're talking with, or they should have at least a firewall log somewhere, right? That tells them what they're seeing, what they're talking to, right? This is something that we built in from the start in the work that Needle is doing. And it's really one of the biggest secrets on how we are able to make sense of the threat intelligence data, if it's relevant or not for a specific customer of ours, right? My prediction, which is the same as the takeaway, is that the threat intelligence communities will start to figure out ways to get different sorts of data, which will be able to actually evolve and change and use better telemetry information, because you do not need to have done the whole analysis. You don't need to be able to figure out that there's a nation state actor for you to give me good information, right? That, oh, you've actually seen this guy before, right? So maybe now I'm either more worried or less worried, right? Depending on how many of these you've seen, how many of these people you have seen. And anyway, this is pretty much, I think when you talk about sharing, these are the kinds of things we potentially should be talking about in order to make it a more inclusive experience for everyone. So I lied, I have a lot of more takeaways, but the point here is make sure you analyze all your data. You have the projects there, you can replicate the whole thing, right? If you are doing if you're doing a threat intelligence sharing community, we would love to have a look at your data, right? We'll give it some exercise, we'll treat it very well, right? And remember, you can save a starving data scientist, right? Just make sure that we can do. And that's pretty much it. I ran over my time, and there's probably going to be enough time for questions here, so you guys can just follow us out the hall, and we'll probably take care of all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.